All right. Well, hi, everyone. Today I'm with Gay Lee, and she is a licensed professional counselor, and she is a veteran with 27 years of experience in education previously. And she focuses on caregiver and professional related burnout. So, welcome, Gay Lee.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I'm so glad
Yeah,
you're here.
today, what I wanted to talk to everybody about is, or what I want the world to know,
Yes.
as you
What's
asked,
one thing?
is, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a therapist, whether you are a parent, we often sort of attach our self worth, or some people call it self esteem, to the behavior of other people. You can be at a party and you can say, "Oh, I can't believe my spouse said that." Or you can be, a teacher walking down the hallway and think, "Oh my goodness, I have this one kid with all these behaviors. What are the other teachers going to think of me?" You can be a therapist who maybe you have a client who is not doing as well as you'd hoped, and that starts eating away at your worth as a therapist. Or you're in a grocery store with your child and they throw a temper
Yeah.
tantrum. I know that's never happened to any of you, but in some states, and they throw that temper tantrum, and the first thing you think is either I must be a bad parent or other people might think I'm a bad parent. And so we tend to kind of take on the behavior of others, and it starts to affect ourselves.
Wow. I think that's pretty profound, Gay Lee. So, tell me, how did you discover this?
Well, when I first started teaching, I quickly learned that there's a lot of judgment that can take place. And I spent the first few years teaching in special education settings. And a lot of times, especially back during that time, I think some of the other professionals were less informed about special education. And so it was a challenge because I found myself constantly informing other people about children with disabilities and how they might act and why they might act the way that they do. And sadly, I think that parents of children with disabilities are especially challenged by this because they're not just in kind of the bubble of a school. They're in a grocery store, they're at church, they're wherever,
Yeah.
and people may not always understand the behaviors of their children and may automatically attach that to them as parents. And like I said, it goes for caregivers.
Yeah.
Maybe, you're dealing with an elderly person with dementia and you have them out and about and people might not understand. It can be any situation, whether you're a caregiver, professional, or both.
Wow. I think that's pretty interesting. So tell me what's the first step that someone would take?
Asking yourself the right questions,
Okay.
such as, what do you say to yourself in these situations?
Mhm.
Does it start to sound like I must not be a good parent, therapist, teacher, whatever? Or does it sound like people will think I'm not a good parent, teacher, therapist, or whatever? We often, if we just put it in general terms, we really equate self esteem a lot of times to the opinions of other people
Yes.
and to how we do or how we think they're going to think of how we do.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of times that's how we judge ourselves. And I always say opinions are like noses. Everybody has one and none of them are perfect.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. So, okay. So what's an obstacle that people face?
I think one issue that people face is social media, to be honest,
Yeah. Wow.
because all of those opinions are out there on social media. And regardless of what you post, someone has a negative opinion about it. You can be talking about flowers and somebody will think you're talking about bees and nectar. So, um, it doesn't really matter what the situation is. Everybody is going to have an opinion, whether positive or negative.
Yeah.
And then our own opinions of ourselves
Mhm.
often come from yesteryear or yesterday. And I think sometimes what happens is that the voices of yesterday, especially the negative voices, tend to mutate into the voices of today.
Mm.
So if you were told way back when you weren't good at A, B, and C, then in today's situation, the tendency is to think, well, I might not be good at D, E, and F.
Yes, yes. And tell me, how do I know if I'm doing it right?
I think it's when you can take responsibility accurately
Oh,
for your actions and your reactions, and your thoughts to yourself become more about being solution oriented as opposed to how I feel about myself. Where, maybe a child is cranky in the grocery store and you think to yourself, wow, that was a really rough day. Maybe I need to bring some crackers tomorrow. Maybe their sugar was a
yeah,
little low.
yeah,
To where you're more solution oriented as opposed to, oh my gosh, am I a bad parent? Or other people going to think I'm a bad parent? When you can take that type of survival mentality or the worry about what other people are going to think, and you can turn it into that solution oriented energy, then I think that's a step in the right direction. But sometimes if you've had some really negative experiences in life, that looks good on paper, but
yep.
it can be very difficult to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I was going to say. I love though the solution oriented energy. So when you're working with people, is that where you tell them that's where their self-worth can come from?
A lot of times people ask me,
Yeah,
so where should my
yeah,
self worth come
yeah,
from? In my practice, I have what's called a values inventory sheet,
yeah,
and they can print it out from my portal when they're clients. And it asks them, what do you value in different areas of life, in relationships, in your work,
yes,
in
yes,
your family? And sometimes that takes a person 2 or 3 weeks to do because they've never even really thought about what's important to them.
yeah.
And so, how can you start setting boundaries in relationships? How can you start improving relationships or doing anything when you don't even know what's important to you? And
Oh,
so, that's often a first step in my therapy practice
yeah,
is once we set treatment goals to just have them sit down and go, okay, what's important to me? And what do I value? And where does my value come from? And the only one that can determine that is them.
yeah. So good. I'm going to look for that on your website. Yeah, I love that. And it's like, it's almost like, when we value negative opinions or we put value on a negative opinion,
Mhm.
almost the same as when we do the opposite and think, I'm doing great because this kiddo's walking down the hall, right? And I think sometimes with kiddos, sometimes I like to give the recommendation for kiddos with ADHD, not to focus on, wow, praising like, you got straight A's, and say, aren't you great? Because they think, oh, when I don't do it, you're going to think I'm not great versus, maybe looking at the solution focus, like you're saying. And I love that. I love that talking about the inner speech. Yeah. It sounds like it just builds that self awareness. Like, what do you value and how do you talk to yourself? I like that. That's really sweet. And I love how you ask, just to look at ourselves as how we ask ourselves questions.
Mhm.
So you must be very busy helping professionals, caregivers.
I I always say that um, when it comes to that value, it's fluid because what you value can actually change over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the neat thing about it is that it doesn't have to stay in concrete. It
Yeah.
can grow as you grow.
Yes.
And I think as you go on in life, you discover more about yourself. And so I think that's a constant fluid process.
Yes. And I love pointing people to solutions. I did my master's degree. A lot of the professors were solution focused therapists. I
Mm,
found it so a breath of fresh air,
mhm.
but combining the self reflection with the solution focused. Well, thank you so much, Kaylee. So that's our time. And I'm going to include all your contact info. So hopefully people can get on your website and get that values inventory if it's available for everyone.
Yes, it's actually that particular sheet because of copyright issues. I have to hold it for my active clients,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean that I can't just put some general questions out
Yeah.
there on the
And I
website
know, yeah.
to kind of back up
Yeah. I
what we've
know
been
of
talking.
one that's that Day Martini puts out, the values determining. Is it that one? Yes.
I've seen it before, but it's been a while.
Yeah, so that's one that I know is available for folks. But
Mhm.
thank you so much for turning us on to that, looking at our values and the self-reflection. So thanks. All right, I'll have all your info in the description.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right.